What is up, everyone? We are back with another episode of Shaping the Culture. Let's just get to it. The whole secular sacred divide. There is no distinction in the scriptures. Some of us have trust issues with God, and some of us, it's like, does God really got us? You can't engage the culture with the gospel that first has not engaged you. Like, you know how people are like, oh, that's just who I am. Nah.
Drop the mic. Drop the mic. Drop the mic.
Shaping the code.
Hi, my name is Bercy. I have a question for each one of you. So for Pastor Ebenezer, what has been your experience navigating generational gaps and traumas as passed down in our Habesha community and your walk with God? And then for Preston, I have a question just about, your history with Chicago. What are some examples of how you speak life into people from your hood and people who are still living that life with the traumas that they've not only experienced but are continually living in, and even how you get those conversations going?
When you say generational gaps, can you unpack that a little bit more? What do you mean by that?
You've talked about, your American identity being sort of stuck in between two, you don't identify fully with the Ethiopian identity, but you don't fully identify with the American identity.
Yes.
And how our parents have that gap, especially, I know you're a pastor's son, so especially being in a church that are two different generations, and trying to fill the gap even when it comes to discipleship, even looking for those type of mentors where there's it's beautifully diverse, but it also comes with a lot of difficulty and I guess even how you guys express yourselves.
Yeah, no, it's good. My story is, I was lucky. I was fortunate enough to have a youth pastor who's 1.5. So for those who don't know, they're Ethiopian enough for Ethiopians, but American enough for Americans. I'm a second generation. I'm not Ethiopian enough for Ethiopians, and I'm not American enough for Americans, right? And having that 1.5 generation pastor helped me a lot because he spoke for us and defended us. And then he also helped us understand our parents and what they were thinking and where they were coming from. And I think that the older I've gotten, the more I realize that the previous generation loves us. I interpret a lot of what they did as just disregard, hate. They don't like us. They don't believe in us. They're not for us. But the older I got, I'm like, oh, this came from a pure place. And a lot of their parenting style came from trauma. They're passing down to us what they received from the parents. So I remember when I graduated from college, I was moving to St. Louis. I was about to buy a car, and my dad was sitting with me. And I think he was coming to terms with the fact that I was leaving for good, and he wanted to get emotional. And he's like, I wanted to spend more time with you growing up, but I didn't know how to because my dad never spent time with me. And that broke me because here I was thinking my whole life my dad didn't like me. My dad didn't want to spend time with me because there's something off with me. In reality, it was just a trauma reflex. Even though he desired to spend time with me, he didn't have the tools. He didn't know how to spend time with me. And with age, I have so much more grace for my parents. But then something that really helped me overcome some of that generational gap or even some of that generational trauma is I had to, this might be a little controversial, I had to step outside the Ethiopian church. So when I got to college, my discipler was a white man. And I learned from someone outside my culture, and he put me onto things I don't think I would ever learn if I stayed in the Ethiopian church. And then, learning from guys like Preston, and, I started listening to black pastors like Dr. Charlie Dates and so on and so forth. And so I had to purposefully position myself in different settings so that I can fill in the gap. And I think sometimes we're afraid to step outside of our comfort zone, but there is Jesus outside the Ethiopian culture. The gospel is being preached outside of our context. And here's the thing I've learned, though, when I'm outside of my context and somebody else's context, they've got their own gaps. So I used to think white people were the answer. And then I was like, wait a minute. You guys got some gaps in your theology. You guys got some gaps. A lot of them, right? And so I started getting disappointed by my white discipler. And I started getting, and I'm like, oh. And then my heart grew then for my community. And I was like, okay, everybody's imperfect. what can I learn from this community and that community, and how can I forge a new future? And we're pioneers in a lot of ways, and I'm learning how to do that right now in real time. I'm always making mistakes. For me, when I was younger, I was like, I'm just gonna be different because I'm different. I don't care who I upset. And now I'm like, no, I can't just upset people. I gotta be a little bit more tactful in the way I go about things so I can win all people. So now I'm not against the Ethiopian church. I'm not against the white church. I'm trying to find middle ground because the gospel is worthy of that.
You said how I be reaching people from the hood and stuff, right?
Yeah, how do you get those conversations going without looking corny?
Without looking what?
Corny.
Corny. That's a good question. I really just go back to my old neighborhood and just be myself. Seriously, I be myself. I don't try to not act like a Christian. I don't try to act overly Christian. I just, I go back. Last time I was back in, I wasn't in my neighborhood. I was in the neighborhood that me and Jackie co-led a church at, a neighborhood called West Lawndale. Really, really crazy neighborhood. I was walking with a guy named Shaquille. He was paralyzed from the waist down. He got shot when he was 18 years old trying to rob somebody. And I sat on the block with them, and I just talked with them, I didn't get offended when they pulled out the blunts and started smoking weed. I just had conversations with them. And one of the things that I learned about I truly believe that God didn't save me from my culture, but God saved me for my culture, to reach my culture. And so when I go back into those environments, I try to share the love of Jesus. But one thing that I've learned for me that has worked is truly listening to people and listening to the cry of people's hearts, because I believe that people will teach you how to serve them. And so I think a lot of times Christians we overthink everything. You know what I'm saying? It's like, we didn't give a gospel presentation in the first 20 minutes, already failing. And it's like, nah, you don't understand how much of a light even your position. And I think a lot of times we feel the need to talk the gospel so much because our life don't talk for us. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't use words either. But I am saying that if you have a position and people know your position and know you love Jesus, and you go back into these environments, your presence alone says so much. Because a lot of people who become Christians don't go back to my neighborhood. A lot of people they don't. So my presence speaks for me, and so my presence allows conversations to just flow naturally. And so I just go back. I be myself. I ask them questions. I serve them well. I give a lot of people money. That's a good way to serve people. A lot of times people can't hear you giving the gospel because their stomach hurt. They growl, the stomach growl. They hungry. Feed them first, and then maybe you can share the gospel with them. And so that's what I do. I just go back and be a normal dude.